The show begins with our female lead Chusha on her first day of work as a health assistant. She's on her way to visit a patient with cerebral palsy. Shortly after, she reaches a luxurious mansion where the housekeeper has been waiting for her. He leads her inside and introduces her to the patient, Han Ki-lu, who's resting in an armchair. Chusha is surprised to see how young he is, but doesn't dwell on it much. She then prepares to treat him and takes out supplies for catheterization. However, Ki-lu panics and runs away from her. This worries his mother, Mrs. Han, who wonders if he'll ever be cured. But the housekeeper reassures her that the doctor has been invited from abroad and is very skilled. Meanwhile, Chusha chases Ki-lu around the house, during which she stumbles and falls on top of him. They accidentally end up kissing, and at this moment, the real doctor shows up and introduces herself. Chusha quickly gets up and realizes that she's entered the wrong house. She then receives a call from her boss, who fires her for failing to arrive at the patient's home. Meanwhile, the real doctor speaks with Mrs. Han, and we discover that Ki-lu has a rare disease that causes an allergic reaction whenever he touches a female. However, the doctor is surprised when he was not affected at all when Chusha touched him earlier. She then informs Mrs. Han that this girl could help cure her son's illness. Hearing this, Mom immediately stops Chusha, who's about to leave. She invites her to stay for a while and asks her about her life. Our heroine reveals that her mother is seriously ill, so she must work multiple jobs to cover expenses. Moreover, she had to drop out of her studies for the same reason. Mrs. Han then discusses her son's condition and offers her a job as his caretaker. She promises to pay her mother's medical bills and proposes that she attend the same school as Ki-lu. Chusha is excited by the offer and she immediately accepts, but Ki-lu is very reluctant. He asserts that he doesn't want a caretaker and he can do things on his own. However, this statement makes his mother emotional and she starts lamenting about how she can't even hug her son. In the end, Ki-lu has no choice but to agree, which makes Miss Han very happy. She then puts smart bands on both of them and tells them to stay within 1 meter of each other for more than 8 hours a day. The next morning, Chusha moves into the luxurious house and the housekeeper gives her several folders containing detailed information about Ki-lu. They both head to school together and he's very annoyed by her presence. In class, everyone is taken aback to see a new girl sitting next to the popular Ki-lu on her first day. After the class, Chusha meets a guy named Chen with whom she used to work with at a bakery. He asks about her mother's health, to which she responds that she's not well. Chusha then reveals that she now works for the Han family as a caretaker. This worries Chen, and he says that Ki-lu is an asshole who attacks the people around him for no reason. However, Chusha responds that he may appear cold on the outside, but he's actually a really nice guy. Later that night, she's very upset that Ki-lu ignored her all day and that she couldn't meet the band requirement. Worried that Mrs. Han will check, Chusha sneaks into his room and sits beside him while he's sleeping. After meeting the 8-hour requirement, she feels satisfied and leaves the room. But it turns out that our hero was just pretending to sleep, and he laughs at her for her childish behavior. The next day, they head to school and Ki-lu once again tries to avoid her. When he keeps maintaining his distance, our frustrated heroine asks him to give her the band. She reasons that this way they won't have to be together and the band requirements can also be met. However, he informs her that he will only give it to her if she can improve his mood by the end of the day. This puts Chusha in a difficult situation, so she pulls out a file provided by the housekeeper and begins reading it. Just then, a girl named Shiwei appears and throws her papers to the ground. She declares that Ki-lu is only hers and warns Chusha to stay away from him. Following the encounter, our confused heroine returns to the classroom and asks Ki-lu if he has a girlfriend. He quickly denies it and also promises to give her the band if she buys him some tiramisu. Later, he confronts Shiwei and asks her if she bullied Chusha. She counter-questions why he cares so much about her, but Ki-lu warns her to stop spreading misinformation and clarifies that he isn't interested in her. After class, Chusha and Chen go to the bakery where she buys the tiramisu. When they return to school, she tells him how rude Ki-lu is and wishes he was as nice as Chen. Our hero happens to overhear this and becomes very angry with her. Later, when Chusha brings him the tiramisu, he refuses to eat it, frustrating her greatly. Ki-lu forces her to study all night because they have a major exam the next day. She tries to refuse, but he announces that he'll only allow her to sit with him in class if she passes. With no other option, Chusha stays up all night studying. The following day at school, she's so sleepy that she accidentally collides with Ki-lu, causing his heart to race. Meanwhile, Shiwei notices how close they are and becomes envious. When Chusha is headed to class, she pulls her aside and warns her again to stay away from Ki-lu. Our girl tries to explain that there's nothing going on between them, but the bitch doesn't believe her. She then drags her away and locks her in the piano room. A little while later, the exam is about to start, but Chusha is nowhere to be seen, which worries Kilu. He then talks to Chen, who also has no idea where she could be. The two boys then begin looking for her, searching around the school. Chen eventually approaches Shiwei and asks if she did anything to Chusha. At first, the bitch denies it, but after some insistence, she finally tells the truth. Following this, the boys rush to the piano room and open the door. Chusha is unconscious at this point, so they immediately take her to the infirmary. Shortly after, she wakes up and it turns out that she didn't pass out, but simply fell asleep. She then inquires about the exam and discovers that both Chen and Kilu missed it while searching for her. At this moment, Shiwei arrives and tries to apologize for her actions. She then touches our hero, which immediately triggers an allergic response. But before anything bad happens, Chusha quickly approaches him and tenderly heals his allergy. This gesture touches Kilu, while Shiwei can't stand the sight and angrily walks out. That evening, Chusha is studying late into the night when Mrs. Han arrives to give her some soup. Our girl is touched by this gesture as she misses her mother dearly. The two then begin to bond, and Mrs. Han shares that it's been 14 years since she's been able to touch her son. She explains that although Kilu appears to be cold on the outside, he is actually a delicate boy. Hearing this, Chusha promises to do everything she can to help him get better. Mrs. Han then suggests that she can start by touching him for 1 minute each day. The next morning, Chusha tries different ways to touch Kilu, but he keeps resisting. Meanwhile at home, Mr. Han returns from a long business trip. As he chats with his wife, he learns about Chusha and how she's assisting his son's recovery. Mom also shows him pictures of her and expresses an interest in making her their daughter-in-law. However, Mr. Han warns her not to get too excited because he's already arranged Kilu's marriage with the daughter of their business partner. After returning home, Chusha meets Mr. Han and realizes he's just as cold as his son. She later approaches Kilu and attempts to touch him subtly, but he notices what she's doing and orders her to leave, thwarting her efforts. The next day, Chusha walks to school with Kilu and tries to touch his hair. Although he scolds her, there's a faint smile on his face and it seems that he enjoys being around her. In the evening, Mrs. Han approaches Chusha and gives her a tablet. It has a wallpaper of our heroine and Kilu, which makes her very uncomfortable. But upon Mrs. Han's insistence, she reluctantly agrees to take it. The next day at school, Chusha decides to complete her 1 minute task no matter what. She brings a toy shaped like teeth and urges Kilu to play with her to see who gets bitten first. Chusha thinks he'll refuse, but he confidently places his hand on the teeth. During this time, their fingers brush against each other, but he doesn't react at all. Meanwhile in class, Chen accidentally knocks Chusha's tablet off her desk. It falls to the ground, and when he picks it up, he notices the image of her and Kilu. Chen is taken aback, and several other classmates also arrive and see the picture. They suspect that the two are in love, which is why they're sitting together these days. Following the incident, rumors about their dating spread throughout the school, putting both of them in a difficult situation. Later, when some students are discussing this topic, Shiwei overhears them and becomes enraged. She tells everyone to shut up and claims that Kilu would never date someone like Chusha. At this moment, he appears in the classroom and sits at his desk. Shiwei tries to apologize, but Kilu confirms that what she said is true, that he would never date Chusha. Our heroine arrives at the same time and hears his statement. This deeply hurts her feelings, and she leaves without saying a word. Days later, Mrs. Han is pleased with her son's progress and suggests they increase their touching time from 1 to 10 minutes. Chusha has no choice but to agree, but she doesn't know how to do it. Later at school, she notices a poster for a Cinderella play and decides that this is the best way to get close to him. She then approaches Kilu and invites him to participate, but he flatly refuses. Later, she discovers that Chen and Shiwei are going to be the lead actors, so she decides not to participate. She then begins painting to make the required props for the play. While she's engrossed with this, Kilu arrives at the scene. He decides to help her so they can meet the time requirements. They end up having a great time chasing each other around with paint. However, their fun moment is abruptly ended with the arrival of Shiwei. She's enraged to see them together and begins to attack Chusha, but our hero quickly pulls her away, causing the bitch to fall to the ground and sprain her ankle. Because of the injury, Shiwei can't play Cinderella anymore, so Chusha is asked to take on the role. She initially hesitates as she doesn't know how to dance, but Chen encourages her and even teaches her some steps. Kilu feels extremely jealous seeing them together, so he interrupts and takes her away. Later that night, he sees her practicing her moves alone and finds her very yummy. He then approaches her and offers to teach her how to dance. Chusha is quite clumsy, so he asks her to step on his feet to make it easier. They then start dancing, and when Mrs. Han sees them, she is overjoyed and takes several pictures. The scene then cuts to the day of the play, where Shi-wei orders one of her friends to sabotage Chen's costume so he can't perform. Shortly after, the play begins, but he doesn't appear on stage. This makes Chusha very nervous, and people start making fun of her. But just as she's about to give up, Ki-lu suddenly arrives and walks onto the stage. Chusha is taken aback to see him, and the two put on a stunning performance. The audience is amazed by their chemistry and applauds them, while Shi-wei watches with jealousy. Later at home, Mrs. Han shows the photos she took of their play. She says she's excited for them to be a couple, but the two immediately clarify that they're only together to cure his illness and nothing more. This disappoints Mrs. Han, but she hopes they'll be together someday. One morning, Chen approaches Ki-lu and hands him Chishu's personal diary, which he has left in the classroom. He asks Ki-lu to give it to her, but he decides to read it for himself first. As he goes through the diary, he learns about her likes and dislikes, and also finds out that her dream is to go camping someday. The next day, Chusha goes to Chen's bakery to help with some work. Shortly after, Ki-lu arrives looking for her and feels jealous seeing them together. He then goes inside and shows her personal diary. He says that if she wants it back, she needs to make him a good cupcake first. Chusha agrees and rushes to prepare the cupcakes. Ki-lu is amused to see her like this, so he grabs her arms and pulls her close to his chest. He apologizes for reading her diary and invites her to go camping with him, to which she agrees. The next morning, the two leave for camping, but on the way, Chusha begins to have some stomach problems. They have to stay in a hotel halfway down the road so she can rest. Ki-lu then informs her that there were no other rooms, so they must stay in the same one. Chusha is disappointed and sleeps on the sofa, but she's unable to relax because it's too firm. Seeing this, Ki-lu offers her the bed, and they end up sleeping together. Later that night, we see Ki-lu having a nightmare of his past when he was kidnapped and a little girl rescued him. The next morning, the two go to the beach to set up their camp. Chusha forgot to bring her mattress, so they have to share the only one they have. Following this, they start to play on the beach and notice Shi-wei in the distance. Our heroine believes that she's there to unalive herself after being rejected by Ki-lu. Worried, she rushes to her, but ends up accidentally knocking her into the water. When they get out, a furious Shi-wei reveals that she only came to enjoy the beach, not to kill herself. Chusha then apologizes for her actions and calls Chen, asking him to get some new clothes for Shi-wei. Not long after, he arrives, and the four of them enjoy a beautiful evening at the camp. During this time, we learn that Chen and Shi-wei have become close and developed feelings for each other. He's very attentive and takes care of her minor needs. When she gets a stomachache, he gives her a sanitary pad, assuming her period is about to start. Ki-lu is surprised to see this and decides to be sweet to Chusha as well. Later, when they return to the tent, he directly asks her when her next period will be. Chusha is so embarrassed by the question that she covers her mouth and ends up falling on top of him. The next day, they all go to an amusement park and have a great time together. When they proceed to eat, Shi-wei accidentally touches Kuli's hand, freaking him out. But he experiences no allergic reaction, indicating that his illness is cured. This is good news, but Chusha gets upset because she will no longer be by his side. On the other hand, Ki-lu's fiancé, Mon-ki, arrives from abroad. She and her father, Mr. Jiang, have come to meet the Han family and start talking about wedding plans. Mrs. Han is opposed to the marriage because she knows her son has feelings for someone else. However, her husband doesn't seem to care about that. In the next scene, Ki-lu and Chusha return home and inform his family about his cure. Mrs. Han finally touches her son after a long time and sheds tears of joy. She calls Chusha the lucky star of her family and thanks her for everything. Dad is also very happy about the news and tearfully hugs his son. Later, Man-kui approaches Ki-lu and attempts to speak with him, but he doesn't even greet her properly and walks away. 2 days later, it's Ki-lu's birthday and he intends to propose to Chusha at his party. He buys a beautiful red dress for her, but feels very shy giving it to her. So Mrs. Han approaches Chusha and hands her the stunning dress on her son's behalf. When our heroine arrives at the party, she looks so stunning that Ki-lu is visibly awestruck. Shortly after, the event begins and Ki-lu takes the stage holding a bouquet of flowers. He's about to confess his love, but realizes that Chusha is nowhere to be seen. At this moment, his father takes the microphone from him and announces that his son is marrying Mon-ki. She also arrives on the stage wearing the same red dress. Through a flashback, we see Mr. Han informing Chusha about his son's engagement. He then advised her to stay away from Ki-lu because it would now be inappropriate now that he's getting married. The poor girl had no choice but to obey his orders and ended up leaving the party. In the present, Ki-lu is so angry with his father that he walks away from the party. This puts Man-kyu and her father in a very embarrassing position. Ki-lu returns to the house and discovers that Chusha has already left, which devastates him. In the following days, he tries his best to locate her, but is unsuccessful since he doesn't know her address. He can't stop thinking about the wonderful times they shared and feels hopeless. One day, Ki-lu finally gets her address from Chen and goes to meet her. When Chusha sees him on the doorstep, she is shocked and asks him to leave. However, when her mother learns that he's from the Han family who saved her life, she welcomes him in. He then ends up spending the night there, as it's already too late. The next day, they go outside to the market to buy some groceries. As they walk down the road, Ki-lu sees an old building that triggers bad memories. Turns out a woman once kidnapped him at this location, and the incident has haunted him ever since. It's also revealed that a little girl appeared out of nowhere and helped him escape. Ki-lu then goes inside the building, and Chusha follows him. He begins to feel very distressed, but she stays by his side and consoles him. As he stares at her with affection, it suddenly dawns on him that she was the little girl who saved him. Ki-lu questions her about it, and she admits that she did save a boy many years ago. Overcome with emotion, he tells her that he spent his entire life looking for her. Following this, the two go home and tell Chusha's mom everything. The latter then recalls the incident and explains that the kidnapper was her co-worker and they actually worked together at Han Industries. She reveals that the company was going through some significant losses at the time and was unable to pay its employees. The kidnapper was one of the many victims fired without pay. Because of this, her husband took their child and abandoned her, causing her to go insane. Mom also reveals that the real culprit behind this was Han Industries' partner, Mr. Jong. Ki-lu is shocked to hear this and promises to conduct a thorough investigation. In the next scene, he returns home and announces that he wants to cancel his engagement to Mon-ki. Mom supports his decision, but Dad is furious and refuses to accept it. Ki-lu then describes the incident at Han Industries 14 years ago, revealing how Mr. Jong took the money from the liquidation and refused to pay the workers. But his stubborn father doesn't believe him, as Mr. Jiang has been a reliable partner for years. He then states that the only way to cancel the engagement is for Ki-lu to provide evidence of his claims. Following this, our hero gets down to business, and with the help of Chusha's mother, he obtains the addresses of the former factory employees. He spends all day looking for them, but most of them have relocated or died. Luckily, he manages to find the former financial director and asks him where the Hans family's severance pay went. The man is nervous and initially refuses to say anything, claiming that he lost the account book. However, when Ki-lu presses him, he finally admits that Mr. Jiang pocketed all of the employees' salaries, causing a significant loss to the company. He also provides the account book, which is sufficient evidence to back up his claim. Later that night, Chusha is walking down the street when she's approached by Mon-ki and her assistant. They attempt to hurt her, but Ki-lu arrives just in time and saves his beloved. He then informs Mon-ki that he has no intention of marrying her and that Chusha is the love of his life. Hearing this, our heroine is overjoyed, as this is the first time he's confessed his feelings out loud. Next, they all go to Ki-lu's house, where he shows his family the evidence of Mr. Jiang's corrupt actions. Mon-ki assumes that he's made up the evidence as an excuse to cancel the engagement, but then her father comes forward and admits that he did in fact embezzle the employee's salary. This disgusts her so much that she scolds him and walks out of the house. Mr. Jiang then begs for forgiveness and promises to return the entire amount. However, Mr. Han says that now that the evidence is conclusive, they will see each other in court. After the corrupt prick leaves, Mr. Han announces that he'll stop interfering in his son's affairs. He also hugs Chusha and finally decides to accept her as their daughter-in-law. In the final scene, Mrs. Han dresses Chusha beautifully and brings her to the courtyard of their house, saying there's a surprise for her. We see that Ki-lu is already waiting for his girl, formally dressed. As soon as she arrives, he gets down on his knees and proposes to her with a beautiful ring. Chusha is over the moon and gladly accepts his proposal. The two lovebirds kiss, and the drama comes to a happy ending.